1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Royal Blue Podcast Soundcheck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Royal Blue Podcast Soundcheck. Monday Show Live. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Hello and welcome to the Royal Blue Podcast. This is the Monday show. We are live and I am your host, Ian Croll. Joining me in the Royal Blue studio today to talk all things Everton, we've got the Liverpool Echo's Everton reporter, Chris Beesley. Chris, it feels like I haven't done a show with you for a while. Been obviously giving you too much time off. That's what it is. How are things? All good?
Yeah. Obviously, Joe and I did the final game at Newcastle United. We did another one of our on-the-road audio podcasts on the way back, and that was a tremendous day for all Evertonians there. Champions League celebrations for Newcastle, but they were drowned out by Jordan Pickford's song at the end because it was, a fifth away win under David Moyes. And as much as Newcastle were celebrating the fact that they made it to the Champions League, Everton were the party poopers on the day with another terrific result and display on the road. So on the back of that, I've been off for last week, but back in today. And obviously while I've been away, I'm just putting the finishing touches. As I was saying, you putting a nice acknowledgement there online to the Spirit of the Blues. Finally, all been submitted. Obviously, the final chapter with the Everton Southampton game. 100 are the most memorable matches and greatest games at Goodison Park, and after finally doing that last chapter there, it's all off and it's all with the publishers now. So we can now say now that it's June, it'll be hopefully that one's out next month. So 28th of July, but you can order your copies online now at Amazon. So back to the grind now at the Echo.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get a link to that book in the podcast descriptions in the next couple of weeks and months, and I'm sure we'll be able to find a spot for it on the Royal Blue Wall of Fame. Next to us. But obviously, you mentioned the Newcastle game. We've got a couple of podcasts from last week that go in depth on that. So if you haven't listened to that or watched that, go and do so. But obviously, you're back, Chris, and we're going to get into it today. But obviously, transfer season has started. This season is, this summer is a little bit different because it's kind of broken up into two transfer windows, isn't it? Because of something to do with the Club World Cup.
It's a weird one, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, that is, by the by, Everton have already made the first signing, which we'll come on to. But I guess it's a huge summer, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we tend to say this a lot, but really is for Everton, given that the number of players who are out of contract or potentially out of contract, because some of those still haven't been announced yet. And, you think players like Idrissa Gueye, who's just got Player of the Year and Player of the Year, to see what happens to him. Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Michael Keane even. So still waiting on those ones. But as you say, Everton have made their first signing. Carlos Alcaraz, that one's been confirmed already. And I read somewhere that it was actually I think it could actually be Everton's earliest signing in the summer since Beckford, was it in 2010, something like that. So getting business done early, and I'm sure it'll be a busy one, and certainly of incomings and outgoings, but certainly on the incomings front. The move to the new stadium, obviously the new owners, the Freaking Group in place, it's likely to be a very different Everton in many ways next season, certainly in terms of personnel. So an exciting summer awaits, and certainly a busy one, we imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Just address the fact that there's no one sat in the chair next to you, Chris. Joe Thomas will be joining us very soon. We literally, hopefully, we literally sat down just to start the podcast, and he was called away on a very important call. Yeah. So I don't know whether he's going to reveal all about that phone call if he ends up going back into the podcast. But we've had a comment basically from Terry Dactyl saying, "Sat next to Chris is the invisible man."
Yeah, it's a bit unfair, Joe. To be fair to Joe, he wasn't he wasn't getting in like his orders for his butties or anything like that.
No, not like you was.
No, it was a representative of a high profile Everton player. I think that's not giving the game away. So it was an important call for him to take as part of his job as Everton correspondent. So yeah, hopefully he'll be with us sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't say no, you can't take that phone call. No. So hopefully he'll be a couple of minutes and he'll be back to join us for today's episode. Today's agenda, obviously plenty of transfer news knocking around, plenty of rumours knocking around, and hopefully some contract updates either today or for the next couple of days. Idrissa Gueye hopefully will have signed a new contract with Everton at least by the end of this week, so we'll keep an eye out on that one. As always, give this video a thumbs up, drop us a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Your support, as always, is greatly appreciated. I guess there's only one place to start, Chris, and that is with Carlos Alcaraz. Over the weekend, Everton confirmed the permanent signing of Alcaraz, the Argentine midfielder that was on loan from Flamengo, but the club activated his buyout clause, understood to be in the region of around £12.6 million. I mean, some concern, I guess, and maybe a little bit of debate over the weekend regards to the contract and his length, initially 2 years. We understand that Everton have got an option of a third.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll come on to that, but what do you make of this deal? And obviously important that Everton have got this deal over the line.
Yeah, like you say, that the question marks surround that. The fact that it is a shorter contract for a player of his age, a young player. But I think Joe said all to be said after the final game at Newcastle. He felt it was a no-brainer. I don't want to speak for Joe, and obviously when he comes in, hopefully he can offer his thoughts on it. But it seemed very sensible, prudent move. Because if Everton weren't going to make their move for Alcaraz, somebody else probably would have done. He's been maybe you could say up and down, but I think he's obviously been deployed in some different roles by David Moyes. But there's a lot of encouragement there from him. A young player who's had a lot of moves already. He's already been in England once before with Southampton, made his debut at Goodison, of course. Short spell with Juventus in Italy before going back to his native South America. And I think he was actually Flamengo's record signing. So big things were expected of him there, and it didn't quite happen for him in Brazil. So he says another chance in England, and I think he's been good. He certainly he offers something different than all the other Everton players in his position. I think whether it's coming in from the left or whether it's in that what we call the decore role as the number 10, he's a very different sort of specification as a player. But he's certainly produced some big moments, particularly in the away games. So perhaps those who only go into the games at Goodison maybe haven't seen the best of Alcaraz. But for the likes of Joe and myself and all those loyal fans who are going up and down the country to see Everton away from home, and those 5 away victories I've already mentioned under David Moyes, Alcaraz has played a real big part of that. So hopefully he's somebody who can get better going forward, a young player who can improve. He certainly seems to have a combination of that bite that Evertonians like, but also a good technical player as well. So
do you reckon his best performances have come away from home then rather than during at Goodison Park?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he had that little moment. Was it on his debut? Was it Bournemouth? And he hit the post and came on and did well off the bench. But I think they probably have been. Obviously, he was huge in that the win at Crystal Palace. His first I think it was his full debut, wasn't it? He got the goal and the assist there, so massive contribution that day. think he had a role in all 3 goals in the comeback 3-1 win at Fulham, the start of May, and then obviously headed in the winner at Newcastle United on the final day. So yeah, he's produced some really big performances as of the team away from home, but he's been like the focal point in some of those big away results. But yeah, I think he offers a lot of promise, a good attitude. I was one of the journalists who was fortunate enough to speak to him through a translator. It was actually on the day when Everton had the first test event at the new stadium, and we were across the road at the Times Hannock Hotel, and there's all the Merseyside pack were there, so there was a lot of us there, and a lot of questions going backwards and forwards through the interpreter. But yeah, he seemed to be really enthusiastic about being here, and he wants to make a real go of it. Obviously, he'd be disappointed it didn't quite work out for him Southampton first time round, but I think he realises that there's some passionate supporters here at Everton who can get behind him, and obviously I think it's best both parties. I think David Moyes thinks he's got to improve still. There's still areas where he could do better, but ultimately the fact that he sanctioned this move and got this one over the line early shows that he has shown enough to prove to the manager he's worth another couple of years or maybe even longer.
You mentioned, obviously, Moyes has tried him out in a couple of positions. Primarily, you would expect him to have played as the number 10, but obviously, Moyes didn't particularly fancy him there early stages. Doucouré always seemed to be the one that Moyes selected, but he did come in on the left and the right every now and again, certainly when Ndiaye was injured. Where do you see his position for Everton next season? Because I think he's had glimpses of good spells in a couple of positions, really, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think he can do both. So he's got that versatility. I probably would like to see him a bit more in the 10, but he's done well in both roles. It's like, how does he sort of dovetail with Ilham and Ndiaye? So you're trying to get the best out of both those players, and it's a conundrum, isn't it? And Dwight McNeil as well. However, he's going to continues an inverted winger coming in off the right. However, he best service the team. It might be that certain games he is better coming in from the wing, or other times playing off the striker. I suppose it depends who's going to be leading the line as well, whether it's going to be Beto or somebody else. See, we know Liam Delap going to Chelsea now. We have to wait and see what happens on that score about who they bring in or not, as the case may be. So, yeah, it might be a case of different sort of horses for courses and different ideas for different games, because, to be fair to David Moyes, he does offer that tactical flexibility now that he can shuffle his pack and obviously deploy people differently for different times. But yeah, personally, I would like to see him maybe have a bit more of a go in the 10, because I just think that see with McNeil and Ndiaye out wide, there's quite a few actually options certainly on that left hand side.
I mean, we've already seen glimpses of what Alcaraz can bring. We know he's technically very good. We know what he can offer. Other than goals and assists, which is obviously what you want from your attacker midfielder, what else would you like to see him bring? I mean, I put this question out on social media over the weekend, and I think it was Steve Brown replied back to me and said, I want him to be a snide.
Yeah, we've had that already, haven't we? We've seen that, as you would expect from South American players. Maybe it's a stereotype, but it's a positive one in that they've got that hunger to win, haven't they? That bite. They do tend to have that aggressiveness, whether it's controlled or not. Hopefully it is controlled. They've got that, and I think that's something that obviously the Evertonians would take to. But I think from a technical point of view, I think he's very good at carrying the ball. I think that
bringing the ball forward.
Yeah, bring that. I don't think too many players in the Everton squad can match him in that respect. Him being sort of purposeful runs from deep and being an attacker, picking up the ball. I think it was on his full debut at Palace, and the way he did it there, you see that sort of a glimpse of what he can do. But also we saw it at St James's Park getting on the end of chances as well. So he does have that, and he can play as a very sort of different 10 to Doucouré. We all know what Abdoulaye Doucouré's skill set was, and in terms of the hard running and sort of pressing, and Alcaraz is a bit different than that, but he certainly does. I think he's got that work rate, and that's just improving. But yeah, for me, I do like the way he carries the ball. I think that's quite special in terms of what the squad. I don't know obviously who Everton are going to have next season, but at the moment within that Everton squad, he's probably as good as anyone in that department of making those purposeful runs.
Do you think the signing with Alcaraz is like a perfect example or a clear indication, I guess, is the best way to put it. That Moyes is maybe looking to change the way Everton play. What I mean by that is we've had a lot of success, certainly since Moyes came in, when we haven't had lots of the ball, when we've been able to counter, when teams have we've played teams who dominate the ball, and we've been able to not sucker punch them as such, but just being able to create that space when we've lured the opposition onto us. Yeah. Alcaraz, like you just said, there's a player who'll get on the ball, he'll carry the ball. Is that where David Moyes is going, do you think?
I think there will be a move towards that. I mean, it was curious, wasn't it, his whole time at West Ham United. He brings them their first trophy in over 40 years, and they're still saying he's not playing in this mythical West Ham style of play. And he's got players like Bowen there, and the way they were playing, I think, or even in his first spell at Everton, they would play, certainly towards the end, they played the football in the final third of the pitch. You get it up and be direct in the way that the Everton crowd want it to be, and people would subsequently get frustrated by the way it was just being not side to side on the Roberto Martinez, and in many ways wasn't what Evertonians wanted to see. But they like the way that Moyes plays, and that he'd be quick and aggressive, but you have the football on the final third of the pitch, and Alcaraz is one of those players who can do that. Obviously, they had Stephen Pienaar first time around, obviously the combination with Baines back in the day, but he had a lot of creative players, certainly towards the end. So, I mean, that was many years, a dozen years ago now anyway, when he left first time round. So, how he's evolved and how he's moved forward as a manager since then. I think Moyes has certainly got a place for that side of the game. And, I think he will be. The problem we've had at Everton in that for so long is it's just sort of mash up, isn't it? It's just I think many people have used the phrase the Frankenstein's monster of all these different managers with all these different philosophies in football and way of playing the game. They need to sort of get an identity back, and I think we've seen that under David Moyes already. He probably will want to take that forward, and I'd be happy of sort of having an evolution of the way that they were playing first time round on the Moyes. I just got an idea in my head of all those years watching Everton under Moyes first time round. There were often exciting games, games that were engrossing, and it was a style of football I think that Evertonians could get behind. So we've got that with obviously times have moved on, and it's the new stadium, but it's going to be the same people in there, obviously more of them. And I'd like to see a continuation of that, because I've just got this memory of Moyes. It's not just sort of the mists of time and being nostalgic. I think that generally the football was entertaining under Moyes. It was sort of a football that Evertonians liked, whereas all those managers that have come since him, it's been backwards and forwards or one way or the other. And there's been a bit of a sort of identity crisis, I would say, in that respect for too long now.
I mean, 12.6 million, I know it was undisclosed, but we understand roughly that's what the fee is a steal, let's face it. Well, what we think anyway from what we've seen of him. Any concerns? Oh, here he is. He's arrived
dramatic
back.
Entrance, yeah.
Joe Thomas is in the building. He's in the room. Everything okay, Joe? Well, he can't answer yet because he's not in front of the mic. We'll wait till he sits down. Here he is. How are things?
Yeah, very good. Cheers.
Any revealing news for us on the Royal Blue podcast, or are you gonna keep it to yourself?
Yeah, keep an eye on the Echo website.
Keep an eye on the Echo website.
He's smiling.
Where are we up to?
I was just talking about Alcaraz's fame.
I'll come on to you, Joe. Just say to Chris, any concerns with Alcaraz with regards to he's obviously like you said, he's been to a number of clubs. Any concern was the fact that he might not be able to settle or anything like that?
No, I think you say for that fee, the fact he's been here 6 months already and seems to be well integrated in the group. He has had a few moves, but I think he seems happy enough in his surroundings, and the fact that David Moyes has got this business done, despite, like I said, already having reservations. He obviously feels that Alcaraz can do more, but he's seen enough from him to get this one wrapped up early.
Okay, Joe. Yeah, as mentioned, we're speaking about Carlos Alcaraz, the transfer. Good to see you first off. Welcome. I don't think I've been on a pod with you anyway for a while.
Feels like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
I know you and Chris did an audio one, but yeah, good to be on a show with you. Carlos Alcaraz, Everton got the deal over the line on Saturday. What are your thoughts?
Absolute no-brainer. Over the moon that they've done it. I think that probably class myself along with a number of supporters of having thought that this looked like a good fit pretty early on in the loan spell. A little bit perplexed come kind of around Easter when he dropped out the side. In fairness, I did ask David Moyes about this, and he was pretty clear that part of the reason he dropped out was because of the 9 start clause in his deal. I think Everton always wanted to try and maintain control of the situation, knowing that they had the option to sign him even if he didn't make those starts. They didn't want to turn that into an obligation when they were still trying to assess things heading into the summer. And also, I think that kind of come back end of March, beginning of April, it was pretty clear that Everton were safe by that point. So we did see Moyes start to tinker around with his players. Obviously, he had the likes of Dwight McNeil, Iliman and Dyer, Armando Broja all start to come back from injuries as well. So you could see that he was having a little play around with players in some of those games. But I like Carlos Alcaraz a lot. I think his performance at Crystal Palace was one of the best individual performances of Everton's season. The way he he played a deeper central role in that game in the absence of Decore, who was suspended because of the aftermath of the Goodison derby a couple of days earlier. And, he really lit up a really dreary kind of grey winter's afternoon at Selhurst Park that day, and he provided the assist for Beto, scored the match winner himself. But it almost, a bit like at Newcastle the other day, it wasn't what he was doing going forward that impressed me. It was everything else. He was so good in transition. He looked so effective at just turning defence into attack type of player that, as I've said on here before, Everton haven't really had for a long time. Maybe with the exception of Amadou Onana, who in the style of Sean Dyche and with the players around him wasn't really able to do that to the best of his ability. So I really think he was, he made a strong impression. And I think back to kind of Brentford and Wolves, I think both those games he started on the bench, and Everton struggled at the start in both those games and came into him later on when he came on and brought a bit of balance in the midfield. I did a piece yesterday just saying the three performances that basically made him irresistible to Everton. Palace was up there for me. But then you look at once the Man City game went and it was impossible for Alcaraz to get to those 9 games to trigger that clause. Obviously, Moyes started to play him with a little bit more freedom. He started against Ipswich. I know Ipswich, great day, bit of a sour taste because Everton threw away the lead, but they were comfortable in the first half and he got the assist for Beto's goal in that one. But then you go to Fulham. Again, Fulham first 40 minutes, Everton were terrible, but the catalyst for the comeback was him chasing a lost cause in the dying moments of a very bad first half, and he ended up being involved in all 3 goals. You then throw in Newcastle, where he was the man of the match. I wrote 8 days ago now that he looked like he was playing for his future, and if he was, he couldn't have done anything more. And well, we've got the answer now, haven't we? For what he's shown, the price that he is, the age that he is, the amount of work that Everton have got to do over a really busy and complex summer to be able to bring in a player that improves the squad, that knows the club, that the manager knows, and who doesn't break the bank before the transfer window even really started. I think that's priceless.
And we were talking about it before you came in, but obviously a lot being made of the length of the contract.
Yeah.
Obviously 2 years with what we understand to be an option of a third. Even 3 is probably not long, like in terms of the average time that you would offer someone, that type of deal. So what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, I don't know is the honest answer. I have tried to find out. I have gone to the club asking for a little bit of guidance on this because I'm with a lot of people in the sense that it does seem a little bit strange only offering the 2, albeit by the sounds of it, I haven't been able to stand this up, but people that know what they're talking about have said there's a third year, or the option for a third year, so I'm more than happy that it probably is the case. It just seems quite peculiar, especially given his age and also just how little they're probably paying for him. I think it's we're used to looking at these things from like a PSR perspective now because of the way we've been forced to, and obviously one of the issues with, or one of the benefits of stretching a contract over 4 or 5 years is you stretch out the amortization. So if you're paying £12 million for a player, well, if he's a 4-year contract, it goes down for a PSR loss of £3 million a year. Whereas this, because it's initial 2 and 12 odd million, you're looking at £6 million. That's double on the books. Now, I'm not too worried about that because I think that from July the 1st, I think PSR doesn't become an issue for Everton anymore. So, whereas where we were last year, and quite possibly where we are this year going into June the 30th, the difference between a £3 and a £6 million is actually quite important. I don't think it actually will be from next year, but I'm a little bit concerned by it. I can't quite work it out, but there are parts of the new look recruitment team that aren't in place yet, and it just doesn't quite strike me as a particularly savvy way of doing things from a business perspective. We're kind of entering that little awkward next 4 or 5 weeks where, for all the obvious reasons, it becomes a little bit harder. The access goes because obviously everyone's on holiday. If this was 2 weeks ago, we'd have 3 or 4 runs at David Moyes before the end of the season to maybe try and get a little bit more explanation. It's going to be a little bit tougher to do that over the coming weeks. So it might be the back end of the summer that we've done it. But the thing is, yes, he's had reservations over the player, and you'll mention there, I mean, he's repeatedly crossed continents trying to find a home. He's done a lot of travelling for a player that's only 22. But from a business perspective, it seems, and it should be business overriding, kind of, it should be head over heart on these things. Even if there are reservations over him, if you're going to make him permanent, you should do it on terms that suit Everton from a business perspective. And on the face of it, these are terms that are probably less favourable than if they'd done so over a 4 or 5 year contract, which is typical for this day and age. So I wish I could shed some light on it. I can't at the minute, and I'm a little bit surprised by it.
I mean, Chris, I'll just bring you back in on it. I guess within the next 18 months, he could realistically go and speak to another club if he wanted to about leaving. I know we understand Everton have got the extra third year, and I'm sure they would put that in. However, it does seem a bit strange, doesn't it?
Yeah, like you said, for the young player like that, it's a very good point that Joe makes actually about the amortisation in terms of if it could halve it, like if you had 4 years instead of 2 in terms of how it goes on the books. Yeah, maybe it's just a case of having a look, like we said, the fact that he has had a few moves, taking a look at him, and he'll take a look at Everton. I mean, you can't win either way, can you? About that, the amount of times they've handed out these 5-year deals to players only to end up with egg on their faces because they've turned sour. Maybe it's just the flip side of that one. I mean, you'd like to hope, if he was anything, half decent over the next year or two for Everton, his valuation would probably skyrocket. If he certainly was to break into the full Argentina side.
Okay, we'll move on then from that. Obviously, Everton have secured their first.
It's exciting that. Sorry, just to interrupt,
it
but
is.
like the prospect, you're right, could break into the Argentine side. That Argentina side is brilliant, isn't it? Like, I mean, for Everton to potentially have a player in that would, that does feel like, it does feel like progress, doesn't it?
I think that you're right in terms of in the past we've been at our fingers burnt, haven't we? 5-year contracts to people and players who've just not fulfilled the potential. Yeah. This is slightly different. My concern is that we see this player getting even better, and we know Everton, going into the future need to survive on maybe selling players, and the sell-on value potentially may not be there with the length of contract. But we'll see. I think it's a positive. Everton have got everything signed, and he's an Everton player for next summer. Joe, we'll move on to Idrissa Gueye. I've got a line from one of your pieces. I think it was written 2 days ago. So you said, Idrissa Gueye teased Everton supporters with a flurry of social media posts amid his ongoing talks over a new deal. The veteran midfielder is due to enter the final month of his contract on Sunday, but the Echo understands discussion with the 35-year-old to extend his second stint at the Blues are progressing. So are you able to tell us any more? Obviously, nothing's been confirmed yet.
Nothing's been confirmed yet, no. As of last week, the last time I asked, my understanding was that they were in talks over a new deal, and everyone seemed pretty positive over it. And I think if you looked at, not just the fact that Idrissa Gueye was on social media, which is not something that he spends a lot of time on, but the nature of the messages and the that he was responding to, everything looked like it was proceeding in a positive direction, didn't it? He was certainly open to staying at Everton. Moyes has been impressed with him. I know he's won the Supporters Player of the Year for the whole season. I certainly think from Moyes' arrival onwards, Idrissa Gueye was Everton's best player. More tackles than anyone else in the Premier League. There is concern at Everton about what happens if and when he drops off. Like, he'll be 36 in September. So, I mean, no one there is ignorant to the fact that whilst he's shown no signs of it yet, the drop-off can come sharp and quick. So I've written this in a couple of pieces that I think in Moyes' ideal transfer window, what he does is this summer, he has Idrissa Gueye there as a talisman, as the veteran, as the experienced player that he can kind of build around. But around him, he starts to build the midfield of Everton's kind of longer-term future. So almost starts to build the replacements whilst he's still there, kind of being able to contribute. I think everybody kind of understands that given the age of Idrissa Gueye, that getting the best out of him over the next year or two might mean having the ability to be able to have a squad that can protect him as well, give him a rest, give him a break every now and then. Everton haven't been able to do that with their best players for going on 3, 4, 5 years now. They haven't had that squad depth. So when you've had players that have been integral to their starting 11, because the drop-off has been so big when you take them out the side, they run them into the ground. Idrissa Gueye's played a lot of games. I think he's played 37 Premier League games this season. Chances are he might not be able to do that next season. Or if you want him at the highest level, playing at the highest ability that he's got, it might help everyone if he plays 25. But in order to do that, you've got to have other centre midfielders that can share the load with him. And I think that's what Moyes wants to try and do this summer, really. Start to kind of, build in the transitional centre midfield as well. But I think that everyone's seen what Idrissa Gueye can do in the Everton shirt in the back end of this season, and given the impact that he's had and the value he brings to the team, it makes sense to try and keep him there for a little bit longer. And there's nothing to, as I say, stranger things have happened, but there'll be a peculiar set of messages to have posted. I think talking about how bright the future is, and kind of joking with fans that are calling on him to sign a new deal. You kind of almost end up into, like, if he doesn't sign a new deal, it's like on the other side of the park, isn't it, when Trent was doing his celebrations after the West Ham goal, and you're thinking, well, why would he do this and then do that, and then I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see for confirmation, but I think everyone will be surprised if this doesn't end up in a deal.
Okay, I mean, Chris, bring you in on it. Joe's absolutely right, in the sense that the drop off obviously will eventually come. It happens to all the players. I think the thing to remember, that players seemingly in modern day football are playing a lot longer and keeping the standards up. Idrissa Gueye is definitely one of those players. I think the concern and how important this contract signing is for me is that if he was to go, we've got no replacement for him within the team. We'd have to go out and spend money. We'd have to go out and buy someone. So just how important is it that at least for the next 12 months that we get this over the line?
Yeah, because I'm sure he, similar to, as you think with Abdoulaye Doucouré, there'd be lucrative offers. I'm thinking Saudi Arabia, places like that, maybe even other European clubs who would have seen what he's done in recent times, because he's got that great pedigree. Yeah, I'd really like. I think it could be a really important one if they can get it done. As Joe's mentioned, I think he just missed the one Premier League game. Was it 35 starts and 2 subs? So an integral part, but again, going forward, maybe it's going to be quality over quantity in terms of his outings going forward. But we've got to remember, it wasn't always a walk in the park for Idrissa since he came back. He had some real tough times. There was people questioning whether he was still the same player after he initially came back, and he had a few howlers. I'm thinking one that obviously stands out is the Brighton game, isn't it? And the Frank Lampard when he gave the ball away, and it's been a bit of a tough road back for him. But yeah, I think he's been excellent this season, and sort of roll back the years, really. You think about it, after he was a player. We've just seen Paris Saint-Germain win their first Champions League after getting rid of all their superstars, and he was there when they had that triumvirate, the Neymar, Messi and Mbappe, and he was playing alongside that. He was obviously, maybe a derogatory term, but the water carrier for those sort of players. But he's come back to Everton and has gone from strength to strength after, like I said, what was actually a tough start. And when he first came back, he was thinking, is he the player he once was? He's really gone back and hit those levels. And if he does sign a new deal, he'll have actually been longer at Everton second time round than he was first time round. There's probably not too many players who've done that.
Interesting point, I think, that Chris has made there, Joe, because he has had some tough times, and obviously, when Frank Lampard was in charge, he wanted Everton to get on the ball and make things happen. Whereas, the past 12 months to 2 years, under the likes of Sean Dyche and certainly David Moyes, Everton have been happy to let the opposition maybe have the ball, and there's nothing wrong in that. It sets up the way you play, and if that's better for you, you're more than likely going to win the game. But you mentioned there the amount of tackles that he's made, I think it was over 130 for the season. I think the way Everton play, certainly over the past time that I've just mentioned, has obviously benefited them as well, hasn't it?
Not sure if it has, to be honest. I think his experience and his ability has meant that he's been able to do that role well for Everton. But actually, I think he's a bit more progressive than just a normal, than a standard number 6. And you see that he's quite competent at carrying the ball forward. Saw that a little bit against Newcastle last week when Everton have got 10 men on the edge of their box and he gets the interception. It was quite often it was either him or Alcaraz that was the one that was carrying the ball 20 yards up the pitch, then get a foul. Like, he is someone that can operate on the ball and can operate a little bit further up the pitch as well. Obviously, as he's got a little bit older, it's probably helped him to be able to sit back a little bit deeper. But I do think he can be part of a more progressive midfield if he's given the tools around him. And obviously, given his age, he probably needs more legs around him than he has had previously. So, he's had a very, very good season, hasn't he? I think that first season he came back was difficult. Last year was a decent year for Everton in general on the pitch. Obviously, it was clouded by all the madness off the pitch. But when you look at the year, obviously they got the same amount. But they got 48 points and would have finished 12th, 30. And to be honest, I think if it wasn't for the deductions, they probably would have finished further up the pitch, because I don't think if you don't have all that mess off the pitch between December and April, I don't think you go for, it was 4 months, wasn't it, without a league win? So
Christmas and Easter,
it's absolutely ridiculous, wasn't it? But and Idrissa Gueye's been a big part of that. So he's a talented player that can do multiple things, and Everton have benefited from that.
Interesting statements. Sorry, from Martin Cummings, Chris. Whether you agree or not, Idrissa in the last 10 years has been our best player and signing.
You could make a strong case for that, couldn't you? That's, certainly first time round, if you look at his initial spell, for all the money that was wasted, woefully wasted, under Farhad Moshiri's tenure, that it was one of the inspired ones. And to be fair to Steve Walsh, obviously he got bore the brunt of that. Everton's first ever director of football. He was the one who identified Idrissa Gueye. He'd had a year in the Premier League with Aston Villa and got relegated, but still no one had really heard of him. They weren't saying, "Oh yeah, we should pick up that lad from Aston Villa. He did well." No, he's sort of flown under the radar. So to pick him up for that bargain fee was about 7 million or whatever it was at the time, and obviously the first 3 years at the club. Finishes with that big money move to PSG, as I've already mentioned, and going on to play with all the superstars they had at the time. And then he's come back, so you probably could make a strong argument for that. And like I say, if he does sign the deal, that'll put him into a 4th season with Everton. So to actually come back, like I said, it's the old adage in football, of don't come back. And if he ends up staying even longer, second time round, obviously taking the club into the new stadium, I think that there's a strong argument to be made for that, to be fair.
What would you say is Everton's best sign in the past 10 years?
Pickford.
Put you on the spot.
Pickford.
That's probably the right answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is probably the right answer.
Well, it'd be interesting. I'm going to say actually what we've got coming up is it's quite it takes a while for me to do it, but I've been totting up all the player ratings for the season, and
the average.
And so we've got all 27 players who were used by Everton this season. So that'll be an interesting one to see when that one comes out of the wash. We can't give any spoilers away with this one, but I think it's fair to say that those two featured prominently at the higher end of the table.
I look forward to the comment section in that piece then.
Wow.
Joe, some contract talk relating to some existing Everton players, Michael Keane and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Obviously, Calvert-Lewin's situation's turned into a bit of a saga, not so much with Michael Keane, because, I don't know whether he's going to go or not, but how likely is it that either of them sign a contract with Everton?
Oh, yeah, I mean, you put me on the spot there. Well, the other one,
I'm putting everyone on the spot at the minute.
The one you haven't mentioned, Seamus Coleman. Okay. I mean, firstly, it seems strange that we've got to this point and we haven't had any announcements. And I think that probably, just indicates just how much work there is to do. And I think Moyes is genuine, from speaking to representatives, I don't think I think Moyes has genuinely left a lot of these players hanging until the end of the season. And maybe that was a masterstroke, because if you look at it, they finished with 3 wins in a row. Brilliant win at Fulham. They did what they had to do on the biggest day when it got to Southampton, and they pulled out that really impressive win at Newcastle. So maybe having the likes of Alcaraz and other players playing for their futures, obviously. Yeah, there's 9 valuable points there that are worth millions and millions of pounds when you look at the merit payments that they'll bring in, and they also set the tone for the summer and going into next season. Everton is as fickle as football is. Everton is a much better place and probably a much more appealing prospect for having finished the season with 3 games in a row, now being 13th and looking upwards, having beaten teams in Fulham and Newcastle that were better than them and fighting for Europe last season than they would have been if they'd have, say, beat Southampton and lost the 2 away games that everyone expected and finished 15th. If you're a player eyeing up between several mid-table sides to go, you're looking at Everton, you're thinking, well, yeah, there is something there I can work with. But yeah, it has been a bit of a surprise that it's still going on to this long. And I think Moyes is kind of caught in that little bit where he knows there's so much to do that he doesn't want to leave himself too much to do. And I think whilst Everton need to have a much better squad, and I think they need to raise the standard of their first 11, there is a degree of value in having some of those players around, still squad players that know the club and that he can trust. And, Coleman and Keane certainly fit into that bracket. Coleman, there's been no secret that Coleman's got a future at Everton as long as he wants a future at Everton. Moyes has made that clear. He has his coaching badges. He assisted Leighton Baines in the dugout for the Peterborough game in January, and after that said he was open to going into management. Moyes wants to keep him as a player. I've written this. I wrote a piece on this last week, and there was a bit of blowback from people saying he needs to go into the coaching things. And look, Moyes wants to keep him as a player not because he wants him to play 38 games next season, probably not because he wants him to play 20 games next season, but just because he knows the value of having someone like Coleman in the dressing room. He's lost Asmir Begovic, he's lost Ashley Young, both of whom are big leaders in that Finch Farm dressing room, characters that he really put a lot of value in their presence and what they said and the influence that they had on their teammates. This is a massive summer for Everton emotionally. There's going to be huge turnover in the playing squad. That means there's going to be a lot of players that are going to come into Everton and going to quickly need to find out what playing for Everton and wearing that royal blue shirt means. They've also got the pressure of moving over into the new stadium and that as well. So he values the idea of having someone like Coleman, not because of what he can necessarily do on the pitch, or when he's fit he can still do it, as we saw against Man City so well on Boxing Day, but probably because of the messages that he can share in that dressing room. So we'll wait and see on that, but Moyes wants him to be a playing contract. But yeah, Coleman is still at Everton in some capacity so long as he wants to be at Everton. Michael Keane's a bit of a tricky one really, because I think for most of this season we've all expected him to go. But quietly, Keane has actually had a really, really good season. He struggled with everyone at the start of the campaign. It was a terrible beginning to the campaign, just generally. But by the end of it, when Jared Branthwaite missed the first few months of the season, and I think by the time he became fit, I think actually Keane was unfortunate to be the player to drop out rather than Tarkowski. I think you can understand why Dyche would make that decision because of the relationship and the dynamic between Tarkowski and Branthwaite and how well they'd done the season before. But Keane was playing better than Tarkowski at the time. Comes out of the team for 3 or 4 months, and again, there was interest from Italy, interest from America in January, and probably people like myself who've got to write all the words about this, so they're thinking, well, when Keane goes in the summer, it's probably nice that he leaves on that positive spell. He had that fantastic goal against Ipswich and a couple of other decent, left having had a run of good form, and kind of almost felt a bit sorry for him in the Man City game when he came back when Tarkowski did his hamstring, because by Keane's own admission, he had a difficult half an hour in that game, but there can't really be many tougher situations to come on in than playing at centre-back, coming on after an hour against that Man City side when they had to do something, they were needed to win games to get the Champions League. That was tough, but he came back from that, and obviously he finished the season on a high. Very, very good performance, obviously, the goal against Fulham, and he was excellent against Newcastle. I think what it's done is, it's made David Moyes sit down. David Moyes, Keane has always been known as a very good professional behind the scenes. He's someone who gets his head down and works hard, and I think whoever's starting ahead of him benefits from that. They're kept honest by Michael Keane, even if we don't see what Michael Keane's doing at Finch Farm week in, week out. We are getting some insight by what the likes of Branthwaite and Tarkowski are doing on the pitch. I think Moyes has come to value that, and again, already you're looking at Everton's centre-back options, and even if Tarkowski comes back fully fit, even if Branthwaite stays, we know O'Brien's done well and looks like a good prospect for the centre-back now after his little foray there at the end of the season. But you're looking at, and if Holgate's is expected to go, having spent the last 2 seasons on loan in the Championship, if Keane does go, you're still looking at it and you're thinking that even with them 3 players fit in front of him, you probably still want to get a 4th centre-back in at the club. If you can find terms which the club are happy with and that Keane's happy with, there is a player there that you can trust. Now, where that goes, I'm not entirely sure, because there's a lot of interest in Michael Keane. Had Sheffield United got promoted, I think he was top of their radar. But there are, other clubs have taken notice of the form that he showed at the end of the season and have seen that he can do it. So there's probably there's a conversation there that's ongoing with the players' camp. And I think it is a 2-way conversation. I think he'd probably like to play a bit more football, but has to be realistic. And Everton would probably like to pay him less than what they've been paying him for so long. I think that's pretty much obvious. And probably in the same way with someone like an Abdoulaye Doucouré, there's a conversation there where there is the potential for a compromise where the player stays on if he's willing to accept certain wages and certain conditions. We'll just have to kind of wait and see where that, because he probably will. He will certainly get offers from elsewhere or has had offers from elsewhere that are tempting to him. Just depends whether staying put is right thing for him and how much more he wants him. And obviously, it's a situation where there's even more pressure on, given what's happened. Look, I've said a lot about this. Moyes wants to build this side around Pickford, Tarkowski, and Branthwaite, and at the end of April, so before the Man City game, he knew what his plan was for the summer. And since then, Tarkowski's hamstring injury, like I keep saying, 32 years old, he's had surgery, relying on durability and being consistent. We don't know how he's going to come back from that. We hope he comes back the player that he was when he left, but he might not be. And Moyes has to factor that into his summer. Branthwaite, we knew there was going to be interest. There already is interest. Spurs are interested. Chelsea are monitoring. Both of them have got Champions League football. Everton hold the cards, of course they do, because they got the player under contract. But the Friedkin group and Moyes are pragmatic. Like, if someone comes in with a serious offer, there's a lot of money on the table there, especially when you've got someone like O'Brien that might be able to come in and do a job if everything else goes well. So all of a sudden, I think Keane's value to Everton has risen considerably in the last month of the season to the point where all of a sudden it is probably a conversation. Do we keep him, as opposed to rather than just shaking his hands and part ways? So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And Chris, just to elaborate on Joe's point, me and Gav had this exact same debate or conversation on Friday, where we both came to the conclusion that we would like to see him stay. Whether you label it as a 4th choice centre back, I don't know. Joe's mentioned obviously Tarkowski could potentially miss the start of the season. He's certainly going to maybe struggle to be there for pre-season. So then you're down to just 2 centre backs and then Keane. No decision obviously has been made. From that looks to me is that negotiations are still taking place, and if you let Keane go or Keane moves on, because that's what he wants to do, again, it's the exact same situation with Idrissa Gueye. You're then going to have to go into the market and find a 3rd/4th choice centre-back, spend money probably on something that you don't want to do. And it's quite clear and apparent that you do need a 4th choice centre-back, because we've called on Keane the past couple of games of the season.
Yeah, I think it's all down to what Michael Keane wants to do going forward. If you look at his situation at the club now and what it would be if he stayed on, totally different to when he came. I mean, you've just asked us before about who's the greatest Everton signer of the last decade, and Joe says, straight away, Jordan Pickford. Michael Keane came in for the same money, this exact same summer. Summer of 2017, when Everton sold Lukaku, got all the money for that, and then the money that was coming with Machidi. And Michael Keane came in as the most expensive defender the club have ever signed at the time, another 25 million on him. You look what Pickford's done, established himself as England number one. Won, was it 75 caps or whatever now for England or with Everton. Been probably as pivotal as anyone in keeping Everton in the Premier League. Keane's gone from a position where he's been one of the first choice centre-backs for the first 5 years he's been at Everton, but for the last 3, it's been this increasingly bit-part role, and as Joe says, he can come in, Man City apart, like I said, anyone would have struggled in those circumstances. He's been a real solid citizen a lot of time, and he can do a job for you. It's, does he want to exit? He's 32 years of age now. At this point of his career, is he happy being 4th choice at Everton? Albeit, like you say, Tarkowski injured. Let's not forget about Branthwaite. He's also got this hamstring injury now as well. So certainly at the start of the season, there might be a role there for Keane if he wants it. But longer term, does he want to? Is he happy being a fourth choice at Everton, or does he want to go elsewhere for more regular football? Because I would imagine, same as Abdoulaye Doucouré, who we've mentioned already, it's going to be on reduced terms, as a squad player rather than the first choice record breaking signing when he first came in. And I know he's extended his contract at least once since then, so it will be on reduced terms and probably reduced playing time. I mean, he's had that for the last 3 years now. Is he happy to continue with that, or does he want to go elsewhere in search of more regular minutes? But from Everton's point of view, I would have offer him that deal, and it's up to Michael Keane. Which path does he want to take at this moment?
Hopefully we find out sooner rather than later. I mean, it's obviously the Doucouré's future has already been decided. Calvert-Lewin, Michael Keane, we're still waiting to hear from that. I mean, stick him kind of with Calvert-Lewin, Joe. Chelsea to announce the signing of Liam Delap after a medical today. No secret that Moyes was a big admirer of him, and even spoke to Everton. Everton not getting Delap, is that a blow? And do you see, some sort of? I mentioned a transfer dilemma on Friday with regards to not, getting Delap now, and Calvert-Lewin, and at what point do the club go back to Calvert-Lewin and stuff like that, or surely they're going to have other options in the market other than Liam Delap?
Yeah, I don't think losing out on Liam. I think losing out on Liam Delap's disappointing, but it's not a blow because everybody expected Everton to lose out that battle, and Moyes was quite pragmatic and realistic about that throughout his talking. I actually think it's still even though Everton have lost that battle, I think it's one that they can take some positives from. I think the fact that you Everton in a situation where they're willing to Moyes is willing to put the interest out there, and it shows an ambition. Moyes has spoken so much since he came back about Everton acting like a bigger, better club than they've been over recent years, and that was a statement of intent that I think backs it up. And I think the fact that for the last 6 months, I think a lot of us in and around the club have been able to go look at the positive things that are happening at Everton, but I don't think that's quite filtered through to the wider world of football until very recently. And I think Liam Delap being willing to, he had every Tom, Dick and Harry after him this summer, and he had multiple clubs that he knew were going to be in Europe that wanted to talk to him. The fact that he knew Everton weren't going to be in Europe and still was willing to come and meet the club as part of his diligence on where he wanted to sign, I think that is a positive, because that wasn't happening in January. In January, Moyes was going to players after he come in saying, look, can you come and help me? And there were players that were there saying they weren't thinking, 6 months down the line, they got a brand new shiny stadium. They weren't thinking a month ago they got taken over by serious people that actually know what they're doing running the club. They were looking at that club and they're still thinking, I don't know what I'm walking into. So they weren't really willing to engage with Everton that much because they thought it was still too risky. 4 or 5 months down the line, you've got one of the hottest talents in English football there actually willing to engage with Everton Football Club. Maybe it's out of respect, maybe it's out of courtesy, but he didn't have to do that given the demands that were on his time and his attention and the interest and the calibre of interest that was in him. So I think that shows progress, and I think that was still good for Everton, even though that they've ultimately lost out on him. Makes things a little bit harder. Obviously, you would imagine that they wanted to see how the Delap situation went before they would go anything concrete or final with Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Don't know how much it changes it, to be honest. I think it's the dynamics behind the scenes are probably the same ones that have been there for some time. It's difficult. Moyes is again caught in that trap where he knows that a fully fit Calvert-Lewin probably has the type of quality that he will struggle to get into the club this summer, and probably have to spend a great deal of money trying to attract it. And there'll be a degree of risk in there because guaranteed surefire things don't come cheap when it comes to strikers. But the problem is the injury record, and it's been a troubling one, and he's ended the season injured again. And the other thing, the unfortunate thing for Calvert-Lewin is, he started to look a little bit better under Moyes when Moyes came in. Felt sorry for him the way he had to labour under Sean Dyche. It wasn't a system that suited him. But when he's had the big chances, he has, Moyes' first game could have had the fairy tale last-minute equaliser against Villa, but Jesper Lindstrom pulls it back, and that big moment that could have gone the right way, he puts it over the bar. And you even look last week at Newcastle, he could have finished the game off. It was a good chance at the end. And again, he's hit Nick Pope rather than the back of the net. And there are just a few lingering doubts there, I think. it's a tough one. I'd love to say that I actually know what they're doing or what the plan is there. I don't, and I think the fact that it's gone on for this long shows that there's probably a degree of uncertainty even within the club over what the best way to play that is, and also probably from the players' perspective as well. I think everyone can probably see the appeal of a clean break for player and club. But there's also probably that element of can they live without each other? you just don't know. I mean, Beto's form has kind of upended Moyes' plans, I think, because he did so well, and obviously he could have scored more goals. He did miss some big chances against the likes of Brentford, and Liverpool at Anfield and a few others, but Beto really did make a pretty strong case, didn't he? During when he had the opportunity to say that he could be the double-figure goal scorer for Everton going forward. Now, I think that Moyes has been surprised by Beto, and I don't think that Moyes will necessarily want to build his team around Beto in that main striker role next season. But he's muddied the water over Calvert-Lewin because he's
scored
fit
goals.
and he's scored goals and he's been a nuisance and he's helped create chances even in games which haven't been, even when Everton have been struggling, Beto seems to get chances, and it's form you can't ignore. So the way I'd describe the striker situation in F and Ivory, it's just that it's fluid, and obviously Delap looking like he's going to go to Chelsea adds another layer of intrigue there. And as I say, with some of these players, as I hope it's been clear, I've got pretty decent inklings to where things are going. With Calvert-Lewin, I have to put my hands up and say I don't know which way that's going.
Yeah, I mean it's not.
And I don't know. I don't actually know what the right way is either. I
think a part of the ways for both would probably be better. I just don't know where Calvert-Lewin goes. I'm not saying just because we haven't got the lap doesn't mean we should go straight back in and negotiate and offer Calvert-Lewin more money. That's not what I'm saying. I just find it interesting. You don't want to be left short, do you? With just two strikers going into a Premier League season, Beto, and then another player, Schmidt, who's barely featured.
Yeah, I do think that though. I think Moyes' priority, having missed out on Delap, I think his priority will be less around. Obviously, if he thinks he can get a striker in, then that he likes, and he thinks he can work around, then I think he will. I think he obviously jump at the opportunity, but I think his priority more when he wants to look at the attack is building an attacking midfield around whoever starts up front that can pose a real threat, and have 3 or 4 players that can chip in with 6, 7, 8 goals rather than looking for the unicorn that is a 15, 20 goal striker, because there aren't really that many of them around. No. And in fairness, Beto's goals tally from the games he did play, he picked up 9 in the Premier League in the end and barely kicked the ball for the first 6 months of the season. So, Moyes has made this point himself that when you look at Beto, if he'd have played 32 games or started 32 games, even in that struggling Everton side, probably would have ended up with 15, 16 goals, wouldn't he? So,
got an interesting one here for you, Chris, on Liam Delap. We all know Gav Buckland likes a conspiracy theory.
Does he?
He suggested on Friday's pod that Everton maybe went in for Delap knowing full well they wouldn't get him, just so they could raise expectations. What do you think? Do you think of that conspiracy theory?
He actually said that. You're not putting words into his mouth.
I can assure you it was to that effect. Words to that effect.
I think that'd be a bit unfair. I remember obviously back in the day when Alan Shearer joined Newcastle United for a world record fee.
He brought this same transfer up.
He joined Newcastle for 15 million, and I think Everton said, we offered 12. It may have been 12 quid rather than 12 million if he was going to Newcastle for 15. But what he had with Delap, of course, with the relegation release clause, so everyone was able to come in. I think in terms of Liam Delap, it would have been a massive coup for Everton to get him. So I think Joe's got the tone right there. I mean, David Moyes was very straight with us from the off. I think he does things the right way. David Moyes, whatever you think about him, he wants to be decent by it. And he was asked the question and he played it straight back. And I think he was genuinely interested in Liam Delap. I tried to get a bit more out of him, saying that you could sell him something unique in terms of obviously the European clubs who were in for him would on face value be a more attractive proposition. But at Everton, he could have been the main man to build a team around. I don't think it was a publicity exercise. I don't think David Moyes would do that. I think the interest was genuine, and I think that Everton, like I said, it would have been a major coup to get him, but could offer him something that the others couldn't. And it depends which way Liam Delap wants to go, and you can totally understand why he's gone down that route of having the Champions League football and all that entails at Chelsea. Just be interesting to see how it ends up for him, because I think there's been people even outside of Everton, the likes of Jamie Carragher, who said that he felt it would have actually been a good move for him to come to Everton at this moment in time. So it's interesting, no hard feelings, but it will be curious to see how things do develop for Liam Delap. But even if I'm taking off my Everton hat, I think that there's a lot to actually offer him with the Everton deal as a young player going forward. But it's understandable why he's made that decision. I think Dave Moyes himself admitted, I think, what did he say, we're behind the 8 ball or something like that. He admitted it was always going to be tough. But I think it was genuine interest. I can understand what Gav means in terms of raising expectations, but again, you can't win. I mean, I remember back in the midst of time, a lot of people used to say that Moyes would try and lower expectations first time round. So he's getting stick for going the other way now. I don't know.
Well, we're running out of time. Yeah. I'm not going to be able to answer every single or read out every single comment or question, but we are going to be back on Wednesday. We usually do like a season review, which we haven't had time to do with everyone being off, and we're just littered with transfer content over the next week or two. So I'm just going to quickly ask you both, player of the season. Who is it?
Oh, player of the season. Pickford, I think.
Pickford, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's got to go Pickford. I think the consistency's just been there again. Phenomenal. And so some of his performances, I think, saved. I think Sean Dyche stayed in his job longer than he would have done in other ways. I think he's had a few runs like that in Everton, because Everton was such a mess at the time. But that kind of October, November, after a really difficult start to the season, Everton just kind of clung on to the rest of the pack in the table because of Pickford rather than anybody else. You look at, as horrible as it was, that 0-0 at home to Brentford where they had 10 men for an hour. Pickford made 2 brilliant saves from one-on-ones. It should have been the other way around, of course it should have been, but as bad as it was walking out with a point in that game, if they'd have walked out with nothing, it would have been even worse. And around the same time, you had the Newcastle game where he saves the penalty from Anthony Gordon. A couple of those games around that period, if those draws turned into defeats, it could have become really difficult. And then even when the tide started to turn for Dyche a little bit in December with those good points against Man City and Chelsea and Arsenal, Pickford again was very good at Arsenal, saved the penalty from Haaland, didn't he? And then obviously once Moyes comes in, he then look at what he did in some of the games that follow, some fantastic saves. And I think the one that I kind of keep looking back on is his save from Harry Wilson at Fulham when he was tracking back. I thought that was excellent. I think if you go first half of the season only, you can make a case to say Iliman Ndiaye. Second half of the season only, you can make a case to say Idrissa Gueye. So I think over the full season, I'd probably go Pickford.
I've got a feeling yours is going to be the same as mine, but who's your player of the season?
I agree with all of that. I think that Iliman Ndiaye's got all the magic moments there and is the most attractive to watch. Idrissa Gueye has had that consistency. Obviously, he sweeps up at the club awards, Player of the Year and Players Player of the Year. So I think for me, there's 2 serious contenders, Idrissa Gueye and Jordan Pickford. But yeah, in terms of Pickford's just breathtaking saves on a regular basis, even games where Everton have deserved to win, like Newcastle on the final day, he still had to produce big moments at key times, which was what he does. And that's a mark of a good goalkeeper. When he stands up, when it counts, and he does that. And he's by far and away, I don't know what anyone else says, it's absolutely insulting for anyone to say that there's anyone, when it comes to English goalkeepers, when it comes to being England's number one, he's like levels above everyone else. And for anyone even to be having a serious conversation about that is deeply disrespectful to Jordan Pickford. So yeah, Jordan Pickford.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to go with the fans' pick and the players' pick. I do think is Idrissa Gueye. I think there's a number of candidates, isn't there? Let's face it. Obviously, you've already mentioned Pickford and Ndiaye. I just don't think I'd like to see more from Ndiaye going forward. I think he's been, fantastic. He's been the talisman, hasn't he? He missed a period off with injury, and I think that has hampered him a little bit. We may have seen more from him during that period when
absolutely.
if he wasn't back. But I think it's from my point of view within Dyer, it's more of a let's see what you can go on to do next season. Let's see what you can do the season after. Pickford, I wouldn't argue with you without a doubt. I do think Tarkowski could have been in there as well. Obviously, he wasn't great at the start of the season, but we know why that was because of injury and fitness. Branthwaite as well could have been in there, but I think for me, Idrissa Gueye, certainly at his age, he's been just the most consistent performer over the past 12 months. Any final thoughts before we shoot off? It's been a long one.
Are we not getting goal of the season?
Do you want to do goal of the season? Sorry, I was just worried about...
I just saw your notes there.
Go on, we'll do goal of the season then.
Right, go on. Well, first of all, there's a few spring to mind. Obviously, I think Dwight McNeil's won against Palace for the first win. That was a nice strike there. And I think for Shea, Iliman Dyes at the Tottenham game, Moyes' first home game. Goal. When he went through them all. But, I mean, come on. Let's have it right.
Tarkowski.
If I spoke to him in the tunnel after the game and looked him in the eye and said, "No, if you hadn't scored that goal, James, I mean, you'd have, after 130 years of derby combat at Goodison Park, Everton would have finished with a losing record against Liverpool. So, no matter what he does in his career, the fact that he exists, that he was born in Manchester in 1993 or whatever it was. He was brought onto this earth to just do one thing. James Tarkowski, he put the laces through it, didn't he? I mean, what a hit. I mean, with the last kick of a ball from an Everton player in a Merseyside derby at Goodison after playing Liverpool for over 130 years, make sure that Liverpool don't end up with a winning record. Like I said, he doesn't have to do anything else in his career, in his life. No. And I know he's good at some other things as well. But James Tarkowski's goal against Liverpool.
How excited did he get describing that then?
He did,
Fair enough. The shivers gone down the back of his spine. Surely there's no contest for that one.
I don't know.
Our goal of the season's got to be Tarkowski in the derby, hasn't it? But I think two goals that I think are easy to overlook, and one that was fantastic, one that was really easy on the eye was Keane at Ipswich. That was a fantastic strike.
I did think
on his left as well.
Yeah, that was a brilliant. So obviously what was right on the game, although it was a big game at the time, obviously pales in significance to Tarkowski. But two goals I think are easy to overlook, and one of them wasn't actually a goal in the end. But I think in terms of big moments, I think Beto's last minute equaliser against Fulham when he left the pitch in tears was a big moment and an important goal. And again, when I talk back to that kind of late autumn, early winter run of draws at home where it's like they were deeply unsatisfying, but they could have been so much worse. And you think penalty save from Pickford, one-on-ones against 10 men from Pickford, stoppage time headers from Beto, and then the other one, the same player, 7 days later, the goal that he had disallowed against Southampton was such a wonderful goal. Like the long ball, can you remember the long ball over the top at St Mary's? His first touch.
Really at the bar?
No, he scored. He got ruled out for offside. Remember, it was really, really fractional. Head of that at the bar, was it? Or went the really,
bar?
really fractional. But Beto, when I think of Beto's talents, obviously his goal scoring abilities, one-on-ones for at least for a couple of weeks in a row, he looked absolutely ruthless. But you think very much about his physicality, his strength, his pace, the way he kind of just knocked the likes of Van Dijk and Konate off their stride so comfortably was brilliant. But the finesse of his touch from that ball over the top against Southampton was absolutely phenomenal. I didn't think he had that in his game, and then he slotted it in so nicely. It's such a shame it got disallowed, because obviously bit of a sliding doors moment. I know it worked out all right for Beto in the end, but having had that big moment against Fulham a week earlier, if he'd have had that goal as well, then you think he could have really pushed on from that point. In the end, Everton, he gets ruled out, Everton go on to lose that game, and he spends another couple of months in the doldrums, doesn't he? But yeah, I'd have loved it. That was a highlights reel goal if that had been allowed to stand. But obviously, it's nowhere near the others.
McNeil scored. He scored a worldie this season.
That's at the front. The Palace one was a good one.
So yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts then before we finish off?
I think we've had it all there, haven't we? Yeah, we've had goals that have been disallowed, moments, all kinds.
I'll have to put that one in for next year's category, goals that are disallowed. There'll be plenty of them, I'm sure.
That's it.
VAR decisions that didn't go Everton's way.
We've got to get back to our emails. We could have announced about 6 contracts in this time, couldn't they?
We all changed.
I'm sure the audience and the fans would keep us up to date every time.
Calvert-Lewin stayed, Coleman and Idrissa Gueye have gone. That's
this podcast's out of date, isn't it?
That's it. I'm like an idiot.
Okay, well, that is all for today's show. Please remember to give us a like and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Drop us some 5-star reviews on Apple and Spotify. Most importantly, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll be back on Wednesday. I've been Ian Croll with Joe Thomas and Chris Beesley, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.